China is one of the oldest and most continuous civilizations in history, with over 4,000 years of documented existence. From the times of the Xia and Shang dynasties to the present day, China has undergone impressive transformations, yet it has managed to preserve a cultural, political, and social foundation that has remained intact over the millennia. This historical continuity is marked by innovations that shaped the world, such as the invention of gunpowder, the compass, paper, and printing, as well as a rich philosophical tradition with figures like Confucius and Lao Tzu, whose ideas continue to influence modern Chinese thought. Moreover, while other great ancient civilizations, like the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, succumbed to time and invasions, China survived periods of fragmentation, wars, and foreign domination, such as the Mongol invasions and European colonialism, only to rise again as one of the world's major powers. The ability to adapt and absorb external influences while preserving its traditions is one of the factors that has allowed China to maintain a solid national identity through the ages, persisting for millennia. However, as the world becomes increasingly interconnected and the competition for strategic resources intensifies, China faces a challenge perhaps as profound as any other in its history. This is a quiet battle for power and control over energy, a challenge that threatens not only its economy but also the well-being of its massive population, which exceeds 1.4 billion people. For a country that has demonstrated remarkable resilience over the centuries, the real risk now lies in its external dependence on vital resources, without which its future as a global power could be jeopardized. With a gigantic population to feed, warm, and keep moving, China's demand for energy is colossal, and any disruption in supply could have catastrophic consequences. To maintain its position as a global power, the country must once again demonstrate its ability to adapt. What many don't know is that, a few decades ago, China was almost self-sufficient in oil. During the 1970s and 1980s, oil production was so robust that the country could even export to Japan, an industrial giant that relied on Chinese oil to power its factories. The Daqing oil fields, discovered in the 1960s, symbolized China's energy independence, representing the strength of a nation navigating the global stage with ease. But that didn't last forever. In the 1990s, China began transforming into a true industrial powerhouse. What was once a country with moderate consumption became an economic growth machine. And with that growth came an insatiable thirst for energy. Oil demand skyrocketed. Factories sprang up everywhere, cities expanded at an incredible pace, and suddenly, domestic production could no longer keep up. The Daqing fields, which had once been sufficient, now struggled to meet the nation's breakneck speed. By the early 2000s, China was forced to change its position on the global stage. It shifted from being an exporter to becoming one of the largest importers of oil in the world. This dependence not only reshaped its economy but also its relationships with the rest of the planet. Oil began to guide its alliances, investments, and even the contest for strategic territories, such as the South China Sea. Now, imagine a route so essential that, if blocked, it could literally choke one of the world's largest economies. This is the Strait of Malacca, a passage that handles a significant portion of global trade and, more importantly, serves as a true lifeline for China. Around 60% of all the oil and natural gas that supply the country pass through here. Without this route, China would be unable to sustain the energy consumption that keeps its industries running and its cities expanding. But why is the Strait of Malacca so strategic, and at the same time, so fragile? Located between the Malay Peninsula and the island of Sumatra, it is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, with over 100,000 ships passing through each year, transporting everything from oil to essential goods. The problem is that, at its narrowest point, this passage is only 1.5 miles wide. This means that just a small incident or intentional blockage could cause complete chaos. Any disruption in this flow would affect not only China but also multiple global economies that rely on the trade passing through. The gravity of the situation becomes even clearer when considering the potential threats, from territorial disputes and military tensions in the region to piracy, which has historically been a problem in the area. A blockade, whether from conflict or political decisions, could completely paralyze the energy flow to China, triggering a chain reaction of crises. Factories would shut down, transportation would be halted, and, very quickly, the Chinese economy would collapse. To avoid this vulnerability, China has been seeking alternatives, including ambitious infrastructure projects like land-based oil pipelines, ports in neighboring countries, and the well-known Belt and Road Initiative. The goal is to reduce its dependence on the Strait of Malacca, but the reality is that, for now, it remains the primary gateway for the energy that powers the country. This type of strategic bottleneck explains much of China's actions on the international stage, from its alliances with Southeast Asian countries to its increasing involvement in maritime disputes in the South China Sea. The Strait of Malacca is, without a doubt, a point of fragility that Beijing cannot afford to ignore. Faced with the risks associated with strategic routes, China needed a solution that could ensure its economy wouldn't be held hostage by critical maritime choke points. This concern led Beijing to seek an ambitious solution to secure its economic future against unpredictable bottlenecks. Thus, in 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, was born. The Belt and Road Initiative is China's modern attempt to revive the ancient Silk Road, recreating the commercial and geopolitical connections that once made it a driving force of global trade. The Silk Road was one of the most important trade networks in history, linking China to the west through vast lands of Central Asia and the Middle East. It wasn't just a single road but a complex network of routes that carried valuable goods like silk, spices, gold, and other luxury products. Established during the Han Dynasty around the 2nd century BC, the Silk Road connected civilizations as distant as the Chinese Empire and the Roman Empire, fostering not only the trade of goods but also cultural, scientific, and technological exchanges between East and West. For centuries, it was the primary commercial link between China and the rest of the world. This network not only boosted the trade of goods but also played a crucial role in the spread of ideas, religions, and innovations like gunpowder and printing, which traveled from China to Europe. Over time, the route was used by merchants, explorers, and even diplomats, leaving a deep mark on global history. However, with the rise of maritime routes in the 15th and 16th centuries, the importance of the overland Silk Road gradually declined. Fast forward to today, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is not just an infrastructure project, it is one of the largest geopolitical endeavors of the modern era. Its central idea? To create an extensive network of trade routes connecting China directly to different continents, spanning Southeast Asia, Europe, Africa, and even the Middle East. These new routes, both overland and maritime, have a clear objective: to diversify the country's trade and energy pathways, ensuring its economy keeps flowing despite potential crises or blockages at strategic choke points like the Strait of Malacca. Beijing is investing heavily in building pipelines, railways, ports, and highways in a coordinated effort to create a truly global network. Each of these investments is a piece of a larger puzzle, a sort of Plan B that protects China against any kind of disruption in its traditional routes. By diverting a significant portion of its imports and exports through these new routes, China mitigates the risk of relying solely on vulnerable points like the Strait of Malacca or the Strait of Hormuz. A clear example of this strategy is the Gwadar Port project in Pakistan. Located in a strategic position, Gwadar offers China a new gateway for Middle Eastern oil, which can be transported overland to western China, avoiding congested and vulnerable maritime routes. But this is just one of many projects. China is also building high-speed railways that cross Central Asia, connecting the country directly to Europe. This new overland route, often called the New Silk Road, creates an alternative corridor that doesn't rely on already overcrowded maritime lanes. The strength of the BRI lies in its ability to connect economies, creating a vast trade network that benefits both China and its partner countries. For Beijing, this is an effective way to expand its global influence, establishing deeper economic ties with developing nations while simultaneously strengthening its own energy security. Each road, each port, and each railway is an opportunity for China to consolidate its international relationships and reduce its exposure to external risks. This strategy goes beyond mere logistics. By creating these new trade routes, China ensures that its manufactured goods have safe outlets to global markets. This is vital to maintaining the pace of its economy, which heavily depends on exports. But the reverse is also true. These routes are essential to guarantee the inflow of energy resources that keep China's industrial machine running. With the diversification of these corridors, Beijing ensures a steady flow of oil, gas, and other critical supplies, even amid global tensions or regional crises. In the end, what the Belt and Road Initiative offers China is more than just infrastructure. It provides security, by protecting its supply lines, and influence, by creating new alliances with nations across all continents. In times of crisis, these alternative routes ensure that factories keep operating, cities remain supplied, and the economy continues to spin. Simultaneously, China positions itself as an indispensable global actor, both in trade and geopolitics. The Belt and Road Initiative is a central piece of China's strategy to reduce its reliance on traditional maritime routes. As we've seen, the project aims to open new land and port-based trade routes, creating alternatives to the Strait of Malacca. However, despite these efforts, the reality is that Malacca remains a vital route, and this puts China in an extremely vulnerable position. This issue is known as the Malacca Dilemma. About 60% of China's oil imports, along with many of its manufactured exports, pass through this narrow route. This is where the dilemma becomes clear. The Strait of Malacca is a fragile bottleneck, easily blockable by foreign powers. If, for instance, the United States or India decided to close this passage during a time of crisis or conflict, the impact on China's economy would be devastating. Without a steady flow of energy, factories would grind to a halt, and exports would be disrupted, creating a domino effect across the global economy. The worst part: the narrowest point of the Strait of Malacca is only 1.5 miles wide, making it easy to block and difficult to find quick alternatives. Beyond the risk of a military blockade, the strait faces other threats like piracy and ship accidents on such a congested route. However, what truly concerns Beijing is its dependence on a corridor controlled by external forces. For example, the U.S. naval presence in the Pacific puts China in a delicate position, especially in scenarios involving geopolitical tensions. Amid rising tensions over Taiwan, China is acutely aware that one of the greatest risks in a military conflict would be the blockade of the Strait of Malacca. And who would be in a position to enforce that? The United States, with its significant naval presence in the region, or even India. Blocking Malacca would cut off China's access to oil and natural gas, directly impacting its ability to keep its military operational and its economy functioning. The situation becomes even more complex when Taiwan is considered. The island is not only the epicenter of a political and military dispute but also holds a strategically crucial location for China. Situated off China's coast, Taiwan serves as a gateway to the maritime routes connecting China to the rest of the world. If Taiwan were controlled by hostile forces, such as the US or regional allies, it would put China in an even more vulnerable position. Control of Taiwan would allow for a more efficient blockade of maritime routes, including both the Strait of Malacca and the Taiwan Strait, cutting off not only energy supplies but also isolating China from global markets. This scenario is already part of Beijing's strategic calculations. Taiwan is a central concern for China's military planning, not just for its geopolitical significance but also due to its proximity to the Chinese mainland. Any conflict involving Taiwan would be volatile and difficult to contain within a specific area. The consequences of a conflict involving Taiwan, combined with a blockade of the Strait of Malacca, would be devastating for China, particularly because, despite having a strategic oil reserve for emergencies, these reserves would last only about 90 days. That's the amount of time the country would have before facing an energy crisis that would weaken its military and paralyze its economy. Without new energy supply routes and with maritime access compromised, China would be forced to act quickly to resolve the conflict before its reserves ran dry. The reliance on the Strait of Malacca and the strategic vulnerability Taiwan represents put Beijing in a delicate situation, where energy, or the lack thereof, could determine the outcome of a war. China's vulnerability in a war scenario, particularly involving Taiwan, is amplified by its heavy dependence on oil and natural gas imports. About 80% of the oil China consumes is imported, as is nearly all of its natural gas. Most of these imports come from a particularly volatile region, the Persian Gulf. These essential resources pass through two highly critical maritime choke points, the Strait of Hormuz and, of course, the Strait of Malacca. In times of conflict, these strategic points become potential targets. A blockade of the Strait of Malacca, which we've already discussed as vital for China's trade and supply, would cut off the energy flow that powers the country. Similarly, the Strait of Hormuz, through which much of the Gulf's oil passes, is another point of vulnerability. If imports were interrupted by blockades in these two straits, China would face a deep energy crisis that could paralyze its economy and, most concerning, cripple its military capability. Beijing would have a very short window of time to resolve any conflict before having to deal with an energy supply crisis that would directly impact its military strength and civilian infrastructure. Given its growing vulnerability in terms of energy security, China is seeking alternatives to ensure stable access to resources and strategic routes. A key pillar of this strategy is much closer to home, in the highly contested South China Sea, one of the world's most tense and militarized regions. In addition to being a vital route for global maritime trade, with around 30% of global trade passing through these waters, the South China Sea is rich in energy resources, with vast reserves of oil and natural gas estimated beneath its seabed. This makes the region a geopolitical battleground. For China, securing control over these underwater energy reserves is crucial not only to reduce its dependence on oil and gas imports that pass through choke points like the Strait of Malacca but also to consolidate its position of power in Asia. By securing local energy extraction, Beijing could significantly boost its energy security, alleviating some of the vulnerabilities it currently faces. This is why, in recent years, China has invested massively in militarizing the area. This includes constructing artificial islands on disputed reefs and atolls, such as those in the Spratly and Paracel Islands, where naval and air military bases have been established. These islands serve as forward posts to project Chinese military power, giving Beijing the ability to patrol and control large portions of the South China Sea. The presence of anti-aircraft missiles, military airfields, and warships at these bases allows China to rapidly mobilize and defend its interests in the event of tensions or conflicts with other countries in the region. Beyond the energy value, controlling the South China Sea is vital to China for another geostrategic reason: it functions as an essential route for energy supply and trade. By dominating these waters, Beijing ensures that the transport routes linking China to the Middle East, Africa, and Europe remain secure, allowing its energy imports to flow with fewer risks of interruptions. This becomes even more crucial in conflict scenarios, where control over routes and choke points like the Strait of Malacca could be at stake. However, this quest for supremacy in the South China Sea puts Beijing in direct conflict with neighboring countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan, all of which have claims to parts of these waters. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, recognizes the exclusive economic zones, EEZ, of each of these countries, granting them rights over natural resources up to 200 nautical miles from their coastlines. However, China claims almost the entirety of the South China Sea based on its historical 9-dash line, a claim that is not recognized internationally and was ruled invalid by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2016 following a dispute between China and the Philippines. Beijing, however, rejected this decision and continues its military activities and construction in the area. The territorial dispute, combined with China's militarization, increases both regional and global tensions. Countries like the Philippines and Vietnam have responded by drawing closer to the United States, which plays a balancing role in the region. Washington has a strategic interest in maintaining freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, as exclusive Chinese control over the area could negatively impact global trade and diminish U.S. influence in the Indo-Pacific. To challenge China's claims, the U.S. regularly conducts freedom of navigation operations, sending warships and aircraft through the disputed waters. This not only signals displeasure with Beijing's actions but also demonstrates support for regional allies. Another key player in the region is Japan, which, though it has no direct claims in the South China Sea, is interested in protecting its trade and supply routes. China's assertive stance on maritime control has also raised concerns in New Delhi, with India expanding its naval capabilities in the Indian Ocean in response to Chinese maneuvers. The South China Sea has thus become a stage where regional and global powers engage in a complex game of influence and control. At the same time, the militarization of the area and China's growing military capabilities raise concerns about the possibility of armed conflict. Small-scale escalations, such as incidents between ships or aircraft, could quickly evolve into larger confrontations, with devastating consequences for regional security and stability. Even without direct conflict, the increasing militarization fuels tensions, making diplomacy and peaceful resolution of disputes more difficult. Although China is heavily dependent on oil and natural gas imports, the country holds a significant strategic advantage. It is one of the largest coal producers in the world. Despite being highly polluting, this fossil fuel continues to play a central role in China's energy mix, accounting for about 60% of the total energy consumption. Coal provides a stable and, most importantly, domestic energy source, offering China a degree of security against external supply crises. Domestically extracted coal is the backbone of China's energy system, powering thermal plants that keep the country's massive industrial infrastructure running. However, there is a clear downside: environmental pollution. China's heavy reliance on coal makes it the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, a status that brings both internal and international pressure. The environmental consequences, such as air pollution and climate change effects, have made this dependence unsustainable in the long run, forcing China to rethink its energy strategy. Despite being a powerhouse in coal production, China's dependence on oil and natural gas remains the weak point in its energy system, especially in industry and transportation sectors. This is where vulnerabilities become most apparent. Modern industry and the massive transportation sector need oil to operate, making China highly dependent on import routes, as we've discussed with the Strait of Malacca and the Strait of Hormuz. Even with efforts to diversify supply sources through the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing knows it cannot rely solely on fossil fuels. Acknowledging this vulnerability, China has embarked on one of the largest energy transformations in recent history. The country is investing massively in renewable energy sources, such as solar and wind. China is already by far the largest installer of solar panels and wind turbines in the world. In 2022 alone, the country's installed renewable energy capacity exceeded 1,200 gigawatts, which includes not only solar and wind but also hydropower, another important source in China's energy mix. This effort is part of a dual strategy, reducing dependence on foreign energy sources while also minimizing vulnerabilities during times of crisis. Renewables offer an energy solution that is not only clean but also local, helping China reduce its exposure to external risks like maritime blockades and oil price fluctuations. Although the challenge of intermittency, the fact that solar and wind energy depend on weather conditions, remains an issue, China is investing in energy storage technologies to mitigate these problems. In addition to renewables, another key pillar of China's energy strategy is expanding its nuclear capacity. China is rapidly building nuclear power plants, aiming to significantly increase the share of nuclear energy in its overall energy mix. Currently, nuclear power accounts for a small fraction of the country's electricity production, but there are ambitious plans to change that. The Chinese government aims to triple its nuclear capacity by 2030, which would help not only to decarbonize its economy but also to provide a stable and reliable energy source, something crucial in times of crisis or geopolitical tensions. Nuclear power offers a stable solution that can complement renewables and coal, creating a more balanced and secure energy mix. Unlike renewable energy, which can be intermittent, nuclear power provides a continuous supply, which is essential for an economy as industrialized as China's. Additionally, China is exploring other alternative sources like liquefied natural gas, LNG. While still an imported resource, LNG offers greater flexibility in supply routes, as it can be transported by specialized ships from various parts of the world without relying so heavily on specific routes like traditional pipelines. Thus, China's energy future is increasingly focused on diversification. The country recognizes that its dependence on oil and gas imports is a weakness that needs to be addressed. To tackle this, China is developing a plan that combines its vast coal reserves, one of the largest renewable energy expansion programs in the world, nuclear energy growth, and new storage technologies. All of this is aimed at achieving robust energy security, capable of sustaining economic growth and protecting the country in times of geopolitical crises. However, this process is not immediate. China still faces the challenge of balancing its energy transition with the need to maintain its rapid economic growth. Coal, although widely criticized, continues to be the foundation supporting short-term energy stability. But Beijing knows that time is running out, and it can no longer ignore the environmental consequences of its choices. The pressure to find sustainable solutions that ensure both energy security and the planet's future has never been greater. What is clear is that the world is watching China. The path the country chooses to follow, whether in its pursuit of renewable energy, nuclear expansion, or its stance in the geopolitical arena, will have global repercussions. China has shown throughout history that it is capable of adapting and surviving, but this time, the challenge is not just survival, it is thriving in a world where energy, the environment, and economic power are at stake. And if you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of the content we bring you every week. Your support is crucial for us to continue creating more videos like this one. Now, stay tuned for the next documentary, where we dive into the complex relationship between China and Taiwan. Just click on the screen, and we'll see you there.